The night I became E. Thornley, I did not know I was selling my soul for recognition. I only knew that the world would never take me seriously if they saw my name, my sex, my truth written plainly across the patent office ledger. It began on an October evening in 1887 in the cramped third-floor rooms I rented above a watchmaker's shop in Clerkenwell. The air smelled of oil and metal shavings, of the soot that drifted through the window from the factories along the Thames. I had been working for 3 years as a typist at Harrison & Webb Patent Solicitors, transcribing other people's genius, filing other men's innovations, watching brilliant ideas pass through my hands like ghosts I could touch but never claim. And all the while, in the stolen hours after work, I had been building something that might change everything. The differential calculator sat on my workbench, a tangle of brass gears and copper wire, smaller than a cash register but infinitely more complex. It could process mathematical operations using electrical current, switching between calculations with a speed no human hand could match. I had designed every gear ratio, every contact point, every pathway for the current to flow. I had soldered each connection by candlelight, burned my fingers a dozen times, spent my meager wages on materials that most people would call junk. And now it worked. God help me. It worked beautifully. I sat there that night with the patent application form spread before me, the ink drying on the technical drawings I had labored over for weeks. My hand hovered over the line marked Name of Inventor. I had written my full name there first, in careful script. Eleanor Margaret Hartley. But I stared at those letters and felt the weight of what they would mean. A woman's name on a mechanical patent. A woman claiming to understand electrical theory, gear mechanics, computational logic. They would laugh. They would dismiss it as a curiosity, a fraud, or worst of all, they would assume some man had done the real work while I merely took credit. So I dipped my pen again and crossed out my name with 3 deliberate strokes. In its place, I wrote simply E. Thornley. Thornley was my mother's maiden name, the last thing I had of her after she died bringing me into this world. I kept the E because I could not bear to erase myself entirely. Let them assume it stood for Edward or Edmund or Ezra. Let them imagine the man they expected to see. The patent was approved within 3 months. By spring of 1888, engineering journals across London were discussing the Thornley difference engine, praising its elegant design and revolutionary potential. The Mechanical Science Quarterly called it a breakthrough that could transform commerce and research alike. Letters arrived at Harrison & Webb asking to meet with Mr. Thornley, to discuss licensing, to request demonstrations. My employer, Mr. Harrison, a portly man who had never once looked directly at my face in 3 years, fielded these inquiries with practiced ease. He told correspondents that Mr. Thornley was a reclusive genius, uncomfortable with public attention, working on further innovations that required his complete focus. He said this because I had told him to, because I had come to him in private and revealed my secret, and because he understood that he could profit handsomely by managing E. Thornley's business affairs while the real inventor remained safely hidden behind her typewriter. I thought I could live with the arrangement. I thought recognition, even stolen recognition, would be enough. I told myself that history was full of women who had published under men's names, that this was simply how the world worked, that I should be grateful to have my work acknowledged at all, even if no one knew it was mine. But then the invitations began arriving. Invitations to present at the Royal Society. Invitations to demonstrate the device at the Great Exhibition Hall. Invitations to join the Inventors Guild, that exclusive brotherhood of men who shaped the future with their bare hands and brilliant minds. And with each invitation came a deeper entanglement, a more elaborate fiction I had to maintain. Mr. Harrison hired an actor to appear as E. Thornley at smaller events, a middle-aged man with gray whiskers who could memorize technical speeches but barely understood the principles behind them. I would write the speeches, and he would deliver them, and I would stand in the back of lecture halls watching strange men receive applause for words I had written, explanations I had crafted, ideas I had bled for. The worst part was not the invisibility. The worst part was that I had chosen it. I had drawn the ink across my own name. By autumn of 1889, E. Thornley had become something of a legend in certain circles. The difference engine had been manufactured by Blackwell Industrial Works and sold to 3 universities, 2 banking firms, and the British Admiralty. Improved versions were already in development. My royalties, carefully funneled through Mr. Harrison's office, had allowed me to move from my cramped rooms to a modest but respectable set of apartments in Bloomsbury. I could afford better fabric for my dresses now, though I kept to simple styles in dark colors, nothing that would draw attention. I could afford books, real technical volumes from the continent, not just the outdated manuals I had pieced together from lending libraries. I could afford lamp oil to work through the night without worrying about the cost, but I could not afford to be seen. Not truly, not as myself. It was in November that I first heard the Duke of Ashford had taken an interest in E. Thornley's work. The news came through Mr. Harrison, who appeared at my desk one gray afternoon with an unusual expression on his face. Something between concern and excitement, like a man who has just been invited to a party where he might be either celebrated or devoured. "He has written to request a meeting," Mr. Harrison said, setting a cream-colored envelope on my desk. "The Duke of Ashford himself. He wants to discuss a collaboration." I stared at the envelope. The Duke's seal was pressed into black wax, an intricate design of gears and ravens. Everyone in London knew that seal. Everyone knew the Duke. Sebastian Blackwood, the Duke of Ashford, was 32 years old and already regarded as one of the most formidable inventors of the age. He had inherited his title at 20, along with a vast fortune built on textile mills and shipping concerns, and had immediately turned his attention to mechanical innovation. His workshops in Ashford Hall were legendary, filled with pneumatic presses and electrical generators and machines whose purposes only he understood. He had patented a steam-powered prosthetic arm that could grip and manipulate objects with near-human dexterity. He had designed an automated loom that could weave patterns of unprecedented complexity. He had built a calculating machine that used punch cards to process insurance actuarial tables, though his design was fundamentally different from mine, more mechanical than electrical. He was also notoriously difficult, cold, exacting, dismissive of fools and skeptics in equal measure. He rarely attended social functions, preferring the company of his machines. When he did appear in society, it was usually to deliver scathing critiques of other inventors' work, or to announce some new breakthrough that left his competitors scrambling. The gossip papers called him the Iron Duke, not for his title's military history, but for his temperament. They said he had never been seen to smile. They said he had rejected every marriage proposal his family had arranged, claiming he had no time for the distractions of domestic life. They said his only passion was innovation, and that he pursued it with a single-minded intensity that bordered on obsession. And now he wanted to meet E. Thornley. "What does he want?" I asked Mr. Harrison, though I could barely hear my own voice over the pounding of my heart. "He wants to discuss the difference engine's electrical switching mechanism," Mr. Harrison said. "He believes there may be applications for his own work. He has invited Mr. Thornley to visit Ashford Hall next month to examine his workshops and explore potential collaboration." I felt cold. The Duke of Ashford was not a man who invited frauds into his workshop. He was not a man who suffered fools. If he had taken an interest in E. Thornley's work, it meant he had studied it carefully, understood it deeply, perhaps even identified its weaknesses and limitations better than I had myself. And if he met the actor I had hired to play E. Thornley, he would know within 5 minutes that the man was a charlatan. "I cannot go," I said. Mr. Harrison frowned. "This is the Duke of Ashford, Miss Hartley. This is not an invitation one declines. The connections alone could secure E. Thornley's reputation for decades. The financial opportunities." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "Then write to him and explain that Mr. Thornley is deeply engaged in new research and cannot travel at present. Suggest a written correspondence instead. Offer to send technical specifications. diagrams, anything he wishes to examine. But no meeting. Not yet. Mr. Harrison studied me with an expression I had never seen before. Something like pity. "You cannot hide forever," he said quietly. "Eventually, someone will ask questions you cannot answer. Then I will answer them when that time comes," I said. But not now. Not with him. I spent that entire evening in my apartments, pacing between my small parlor and the even smaller room I used as a workshop. The Duke's letter sat on my desk, unopened. I knew I should read it, should understand exactly what he wanted, but I found I could not bear to see his handwriting, could not bear to imagine him sitting in some grand library, composing careful questions about work I had created, but could never openly claim. I had built myself a beautiful cage, and now I was trapped inside it. 3 days later, Mr. Harrison informed me that the Duke had accepted the delay but insisted on a meeting at the Grand Gala of the Royal Scientific Society in December. The gala was the social event of the scientific season, a glittering affair where inventors and industrialists and academics gathered to discuss innovations over champagne and roasted pheasant. E. Thornley had been invited, of course. The actor I employed had attended last year and had managed to avoid any serious technical discussions by claiming a throat ailment that limited his speech. But the Duke of Ashford would not be so easily deflected. If he wanted to meet E. Thornley, he would corner him at the gala, would ask probing questions, would expose the fraud in front of London's entire scientific establishment. I could not let that happen, but I also could not see how to prevent it. The weeks before the gala passed in a haze of anxiety. I threw myself into my work, designing improvements to the difference engine, sketching plans for a new machine that could store calculated results in a mechanical memory system. I told myself that if I kept creating, kept innovating, kept proving the value of E. Thornley's mind, then perhaps the deception would not matter. Perhaps what I had built would be more important than the lies I had told to build it. But late at night, alone in my workshop with only the tick of gears and the hiss of gas lamps for company, I knew the truth. I had not just hidden my name, I had hidden myself, and the longer I remained hidden, the more impossible it became to step into the light. 1 week before the gala, I made a decision. I would attend. Not as E. Thornley, but as myself. As Eleanor Hartley, typist. Anonymous woman in a dark dress, unremarkable and beneath notice. I would watch from the edges of the ballroom as the Duke confronted my hired actor. I would see the moment when he realized the truth, when he exposed the fraud. And perhaps in that moment of destruction, I would finally understand what I had really lost by choosing invisibility. I told no one of my plan. Mr. Harrison would have forbidden it. The actor would have panicked. So I simply arranged for my invitation through the office, claiming I wished to attend as Mr. Harrison's assistant to take notes on the presentations. He agreed readily enough. After all, who would notice one more woman in the background? The night of the gala, I dressed carefully in a gown of deep burgundy silk, simple but well made, with a high collar and long sleeves appropriate for a working woman attending a professional function. I pinned my dark hair severely back, wore no jewelry except my mother's small silver locket. I wanted to be invisible, but I also wanted, for once, to look like I belonged in the same room as the people who would determine E. Thornley's fate. The Royal Scientific Society Hall was magnificent, all gaslit chandeliers and polished marble, with great arched windows overlooking the Thames. The air smelled of hothouse flowers and expensive perfume, of brandy and machine oil. Inventors displayed their latest creations on long tables draped in velvet. Clockwork automatons that could write poetry, pneumatic lifts that could carry cargo to dizzying heights, electrical lighting systems that cast everything in harsh white brilliance. The crowd was a mix of frock coats and evening gowns, of men debating gear ratios over champagne and women listening with polite incomprehension or, occasionally, with eyes that suggested they understood more than they were permitted to reveal. I found a position near one of the tall windows, partly hidden by a potted palm, where I could observe the room without being observed. The actor who played E. Thornley had not yet arrived. I scanned the crowd for the Duke of Ashford, wondering if I would even recognize him. I had seen sketches in the papers, of course, but illustrations rarely captured truth. Then I saw him, and I forgot to breathe. He stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a small cluster of men who seemed to be trying very hard to impress him. He was tall, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite for all the warmth it showed. He wore formal evening clothes, black coat and white tie, perfectly tailored but somehow stark, as if he had dressed for a funeral rather than a celebration. His eyes were the color of steel in winter, and they moved across the room with the systematic precision of a man cataloging every detail, every flaw, every weakness. He was not handsome in the conventional sense. His features were too sharp, too severe, but there was something compelling in the way he held himself, in the intelligence that radiated from him like heat from a furnace. He looked like a man who had never doubted himself, who had never compromised, who had never hidden anything because he had never needed to. I hated him immediately, and I could not look away. One of the men speaking to him gestured toward a display table, clearly trying to direct the Duke's attention to some invention or another. The Duke glanced at it, said something brief, and the man deflated visibly. Then the Duke's gaze swept the room again, methodical, searching. I pressed myself deeper into the shadow of the palm fronds, suddenly terrified that he might see me, might somehow recognize me even though we had never met, might sense the connection between the invisible woman in the corner and the phantom inventor he sought. His eyes passed over me without stopping. I was nothing to him. Just another woman in a dark dress, part of the scenery, barely human enough to register, and that should have brought relief. Instead, it brought a sharp, unexpected pain, like pressing on a bruise I had not known was there. A stir near the entrance drew everyone's attention. The actor playing E. Thornley had arrived, looking nervous despite his rehearsed smile. He was a competent performer, I had to admit. He moved through the crowd with appropriate modesty, accepting congratulations on his difference engine with gracious nods, deflecting technical questions with carefully vague responses about inspiration and intuition. Mr. Harrison stayed close to him, managing introductions, steering conversations away from dangerous territory. The Duke of Ashford watched this performance with an expression that revealed nothing. Then he began moving through the crowd, not hurrying, but with clear purpose. He was going to intercept E. Thornley. He was going to ask his questions, and I was going to watch my entire carefully constructed lie collapse in front of London's scientific elite. I should have felt fear. Instead, I felt something closer to relief. Perhaps it would be better this way. Perhaps the truth, however brutal, would be easier to bear than this endless performance. The Duke reached E. Thornley just as the actor accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Mr. Harrison saw the Duke approaching and went pale. The Duke extended his hand, and the actor shook it with false confidence. I could not hear their words over the noise of the crowd, but I watched the Duke's face as he spoke, watched the way his eyes narrowed slightly, the way his mouth set in a thin line. He was asking questions. The actor was answering, and the Duke was not satisfied. Their conversation lasted perhaps 5 minutes. To me, it felt like hours. I watched the Duke's expression shift from polite interest to skepticism, to something harder, colder. I watched the actor begin to sweat despite the cool evening air. I watched Mr. Harrison attempt to intervene and be silenced by a single glance from those steel-gray eyes. And then I watched the Duke say something final, something that made the actor step back with visible shock and turn away without another word. He walked directly toward my hiding place behind the palm. I froze, pressed against the window, certain he would pass me by. But he stopped 3 feet away, his back to me, and spoke without turning around. "You may as well come out," he said. His voice was deep and cold and absolutely certain. "I know you have been watching me, and I suspect you know why I am here." For a moment I thought he was speaking to someone else. Then he turned, and his eyes met mine, and I realized with dawning horror that he had known I was there all along, that he had been aware of me from the moment I entered the room, that nothing, absolutely nothing, escaped his notice. "Tell me," he said quietly, his gaze pinning me in place like an insect on a collector's board. "Are you going to continue pretending you are merely a typist? Or are you ready to admit that you are E. Thornley?" The ballroom seemed to tilt around me. I opened my mouth to deny it, to laugh it off, to say he was mistaken. But the words would not come. Because in that moment, facing this cold, brilliant man who had seen through every layer of deception, I discovered I was tired, so terribly tired of lying. "How did you know?" I whispered. He smiled then, just barely, a slight curve of his mouth that held no warmth at all. "Because your actor could not answer a single question about the switching mechanism's design tolerances. Because the handwriting on the patent application is identical to the annotations on technical drawings filed by Harrison and Webb's typing staff. Because I have spent 3 months investigating E. Thornley, and everything I have learned points to one conclusion." He took a step closer, and I smelled machine oil and expensive soap, an oddly compelling combination. "You are brilliant, Miss Hartley," he said. "Your difference engine is the most elegant piece of electrical engineering I have seen in a decade. But you are also a fraud, and I am going to expose you. The words should have destroyed me. Instead, they felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to me in 2 years. Why? I asked. Why do you care? He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said something I did not expect. Because I do not tolerate lies in science, Miss Hartley, not even ones told for understandable reasons. If you are the true inventor, then you should have the courage to claim your work. And if you cannot do that... His voice dropped lower, almost gentle, though his eyes remained cold. Then, perhaps you do not deserve the recognition you seek. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone behind the palm, my heart pounding so hard I thought the entire ballroom must hear it. And I knew in that moment that everything was about to change, that the cage I had built was about to shatter, and that the man who would break it open was the last man in the world I should ever have allowed to matter. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my workshop until dawn, surrounded by the skeletal remains of half-finished machines, watching the gaslight flicker against brass gears and copper wire. My hands trembled as I tried to work, tried to lose myself in the familiar comfort of creation. But every calculation dissolved into the memory of steel-gray eyes and that cold, certain voice. You are a fraud, and I am going to expose you. The worst part was that he was right. Not about the fraud, not entirely, but about the cowardice. I had hidden behind a man's name because I was afraid. Afraid of rejection, of mockery, of being dismissed as a curiosity or worse. I had told myself it was pragmatism, survival, the only way a woman could contribute to science in a world that refused to see her. But the Duke of Ashford had stripped away that comfortable lie with a few brutal words. If you cannot claim your work, then perhaps you do not deserve the recognition you seek. I had built something extraordinary, and then I had given it away to a phantom, to a fiction, because I did not believe the world would accept it from my hands. That was the truth that kept me awake as the sky slowly lightened beyond my window, as the city began to stir with the clatter of milk carts and the distant whistle of morning trains. I had not just hidden my name, I had hidden my faith in myself. When the knock came at my door just after 7, I thought it might be my landlady with the Morning Post. Instead, I opened it to find a messenger boy in the Duke of Ashford's livery, all polished buttons and dark green wool, holding a cream-colored envelope sealed with that distinctive mark of gears and ravens. The message inside was brief. Miss Hartley, I require your presence at Ashford Hall this afternoon at 3 o'clock. A carriage will collect you at 2:30. We have matters to discuss that cannot be addressed in correspondence. Do not disappoint me by failing to appear. It was signed simply with an A in black ink, the letter slashed across the page like a blade. I should have refused. I should have written back some polite excuse, claimed illness, prior obligations, anything to avoid walking into the Duke's territory where he held every advantage. But I found myself penning a single-word reply. Agreed. Because part of me, the part that had spent 2 years hiding in shadows, wanted to face him. Wanted to know what he intended to do with the truth he had discovered. Wanted, perhaps, to finally stop running. The carriage arrived precisely at 2:30, a magnificent thing of black lacquered wood and brass fittings, drawn by a pair of matched grays. The driver, an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes, helped me inside without comment. The interior was upholstered in deep green leather, and I noticed with fascination that the walls held small brass panels with switches and dials. When I touched one experimentally, the carriage's lamps flared to life with electrical brilliance, far brighter than any oil lamp. His own design, the driver said when he saw my expression. The Duke does not trust anything he has not personally improved. We rolled through London's afternoon streets, past the smoke-stained buildings of Bloomsbury, into increasingly grand neighborhoods. The city's usual fog hung heavy today, turning the world into a study in gray and gold, gaslight halos bleeding through the mist. I watched factories give way to townhouses, watched the streets widen and the crowds thin, until finally we turned through great iron gates worked into intricate patterns of mechanical components, gears, pistons, springs, all rendered in black metal against the gray stone walls that surrounded Ashford Hall's grounds. The house itself was not what I expected. I had imagined something Gothic and imposing, all dark stone and pointed arches. Instead, Ashford Hall was a strange marriage of classical elegance and industrial innovation. The main structure was Georgian, all symmetry and proportion, built from pale stone that glowed softly in the foggy light. But attached to it, sprawling behind and to the sides, were additions that could only be described as functional. Glass and iron structures that looked like greenhouses or laboratories, metal chimneys that rose at odd angles, great wheels and pipes that suggested machinery on a scale I could barely comprehend. Steam vented from somewhere in the complex, rising to join the fog. The whole effect was both beautiful and unsettling, as if someone had grafted a factory onto a palace and made it work. The driver helped me down before a side entrance rather than the grand front doors. More practical, he explained. The Duke is in his workshop. He asked that you be brought directly there. I followed a housekeeper through corridors that shifted between opulence and utility with jarring suddenness. One moment we walked on Persian carpets beneath crystal chandeliers. The next, we were in passages lined with exposed pipes and electrical conduits, the walls vibrating faintly with the rhythm of unseen engines. The air smelled of machine oil and ozone, of hot metal, and the particular sharp scent of electrical current. I heard the hiss of pneumatics, the whir of gears, sounds that should not exist in a gentleman's residence, but here seemed as natural as breathing. The workshop occupied what must have once been a ballroom. Enormous windows stretched from floor to ceiling, flooding the space with gray daylight. But every other surface was covered with machinery. Workbenches lined the walls, each one holding projects in various states of completion. I saw the gleaming skeleton of a mechanical arm, far more sophisticated than any prosthetic I had imagined. I saw calculating engines that made my difference engine look like a child's toy, their brass components fitted together with impossible precision. I saw electrical generators, pneumatic presses, devices whose purposes I could not even guess. And in the center of it all, bent over a workbench with tools in hand, was the Duke of Ashford. He did not look up when I entered. He was dressed for work, not society. His shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, a leather apron protecting his clothes from oil and metal shavings. His dark hair had fallen forward across his forehead. For a moment, absorbed in whatever adjustment he was making to the device before him, he looked almost human, almost approachable. Then he straightened, set down his tools with careful precision, and turned to face me, and the impression shattered. His eyes were as cold as they had been at the Gala, his expression revealing nothing. "Miss Hartley," he said, punctual. "I appreciate that in a person." He gestured toward a chair near his workbench, metal and leather like everything else in this space. "Sit. We have a great deal to discuss." I remained standing. "You said you intended to expose me. If that is your plan, then I see no point in discussion." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "Do you always assume the worst of people, Miss Hartley? Or is it only me?" I met his gaze steadily. "You called me a fraud in front of the entire scientific community. What else should I assume?" "I called you a fraud behind a potted palm," he corrected. "If I had intended public exposure, I would have announced it in the ballroom." He moved to a side table where a tea service waited, incongruously delicate amid all this machinery. "Tea? I find it helps with concentration." The mundane offer in this extraordinary setting threw me off balance. "I am not here for tea, Your Grace. I am here because you commanded it. If you have something to say, then please say it." He poured 2 cups regardless, added no sugar or milk, and held one out to me. When I did not take it, he set it on the workbench beside me and returned to his own. "Very well. Direct conversation. I appreciate that as well." He took a sip of tea, watching me over the rim of the cup. "I have spent 3 months investigating E. Thornley. I have examined every patent filed under that name, studied the technical specifications, analyzed the design philosophy. Your difference engine is brilliant work, Miss Hartley. The electrical switching mechanism alone represents an innovation that could change computing forever. The way you have integrated current regulation with mechanical precision, the elegance of your gear ratios, the efficiency of your power consumption, all of it demonstrates a mind of rare capability." I waited. There had to be a but coming. "But," he continued, setting down his cup, "you have hidden that mind behind a fiction. And in doing so, you have created a problem that extends beyond your personal circumstances. The scientific community has embraced E. Thornley. They have built upon your work. They have cited it, improved it, incorporated it into their own designs. The difference engine is no longer just your invention. It has become foundational. And if I expose you now, if I reveal that E. Thornley is a woman who lacked the courage to claim her own work, it will not just destroy your reputation. It will cast doubt on every innovation that has built upon yours. It will damage the very field you hope to advance." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had not considered that, had not thought beyond my own fear and ambition to the broader implications. He was right. If E. Thornley was revealed as a fraud, every engineer who had praised the work would look foolish. Every improvement built on my design would be questioned. The scandal would spread like poison through the entire scientific establishment. "So you plan to keep my secret," I said slowly, "to protect the field." "No," he said flatly. "I plan to force you to reveal it yourself, the right way, with evidence, with demonstrations, with proof so overwhelming that even the most skeptical fool will have to acknowledge your capability." He turned back to his workbench, picked up the device he had been working on. "This is a regulator valve for a pneumatic compression system. It keeps pressure consistent despite variable input. Simple enough in concept, but the execution requires precise calibration. I have been working on it for 2 days and cannot achieve stable performance." He held it out to me. "Fix it." I stared at him. Excuse me? You heard me. Fix it. Show me that you are who you claim to be. Prove that you understand mechanical principles, that your difference engine was not some lucky accident or stolen design. He set the valve on the workbench between us. You have 1 hour. This is absurd, I said. I am not some performing dog, Your Grace, to jump through hoops for your entertainment. No, he agreed. You are an inventor who has spent 2 years hiding your light under a bushel. I am offering you a chance to let it shine, to show someone who will actually see it and appreciate it for what it is. Unless, of course, you would prefer I simply expose you tomorrow and let the scandal unfold naturally. Your choice. The cold fury in my chest warred with something else. Curiosity. The challenge itself called to me. I moved to the workbench and picked up the valve, turning it in my hands. It was beautifully made. All gleaming brass and fitted joints, but I could feel the imperfection in the weight distribution. The calibration spring is too stiff, I said. It is responding to pressure changes, but overshooting the compensation. You need a softer spring or a dampening mechanism. Show me, he said. I looked around his workshop, located a tool chest, and helped myself to what I needed. He watched in silence as I disassembled the valve, examined the spring, and replaced it with one from his supply cabinet that had the correct tension rating. Then I added a small brass collar that would dampen oscillation, reassembled the entire mechanism, and tested it with a hand pump. The pressure gauge held steady. I set it down without comment. The Duke picked it up, tested it himself, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw genuine surprise on his face. 47 minutes, he said, checking his pocket watch, and a more elegant solution than the one I was attempting. He set the valve down and looked at me with something that might have been respect. You are the real E. Thornley. There is no question. I had waited 2 years for someone to recognize my work, to see past the fiction to the mind that created it. But I had always imagined that recognition would bring joy, validation, triumph. Instead, standing in this cold workshop facing this cold man, I felt only exhaustion. What now? I asked. Do you drag me before the Royal Society and demand I prove myself again? Do you force me to confess my deception and beg forgiveness? What exactly is your plan? Your Grace? He leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, studying me with those unreadable eyes. My plan is for you to work with me. Here, in this workshop. I will provide you with resources, materials, tools, whatever you need to continue your innovations. In exchange, you will help me with my own projects. We will collaborate, Miss Hartley. And while we work, you will document everything. We will publish papers together, under both our names. Slowly, methodically, we will establish your reputation as an inventor in your own right. And when that foundation is solid, when you have enough acknowledged work to stand on, then you will reveal that you are E. Thornley. You will claim your earlier invention, and you will have the credibility to weather the scandal. I stared at him. You want me to work with you. Why? Because I have never met another inventor whose mind works like mine, he said simply. Because your approach to problems is different from mine in ways that complement rather than contradict. Because I am tired of working alone, and I suspect you are tired of hiding. And because, Miss Hartley, I do not believe women are inherently inferior to men in matters of intellect or innovation. I believe society has simply refused to educate them properly or give them opportunities to prove otherwise. You are proof that, given the chance, a female mind can equal or exceed any male equivalent. I would like to demonstrate that truth to the world, and I would like to use your considerable talents to advance my own work in the process. He smiled slightly, and it was not a warm expression. Call it mutual exploitation if you prefer, but I think it could benefit us both. The offer was extraordinary, impossible. Everything I had wanted without knowing I wanted it. Access to resources beyond my wildest imaginings. Collaboration with one of the greatest inventors of the age. A path to claiming my work without destroying everything I had built. It was perfect. which meant there had to be a trap hidden somewhere in the gleaming machinery of his proposal. "And if I refuse?" I asked. "Then I will expose you tomorrow," he said calmly, "and you will face the consequences alone. Your choice, Miss Hartley. Partnership or destruction. But I will not allow the lie to continue as it stands. One way or another, the truth will come out. I am simply offering you a chance to control how it emerges." I wanted to hate him for the ultimatum, wanted to rage at the arrogance of a man who thought he could command my future like one of his machines. But I could not ignore the logic of his proposal, or the strange, unsettling fact that part of me wanted to accept. Not because I was afraid of exposure, though I was, but because the idea of working in this workshop, of having access to these tools, of collaborating with a mind that could actually understand what I was trying to create, that possibility called to something deep in my soul. "I have conditions," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "I am offering to save your reputation and advance your career. What conditions could you possibly have?" "First," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart, "my work remains my own. We may collaborate, but anything I create here, any innovation or invention I develop, will be credited to me alone unless it is genuinely a joint effort. I will not be relegated to assistant or footnote in your achievements." "Agreed," he said without hesitation. "Second, you will treat me as an equal. Not as a curiosity, not as a woman you are charitably helping, but as a fellow inventor whose work you respect. If you cannot do that, then this partnership is pointless." Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, but a slight easing of that iron control. "I would not have made this offer if I did not already respect your work, Miss Hartley. But I understand your concern. You have my word that I will treat you as I would treat any colleague of comparable skill. Which means," he added dryly, "I will be brutally honest about your failures as well as your successes. I do not coddle anyone, regardless of sex." I found myself almost smiling. I would expect nothing less. "And third, if at any point I decide this arrangement is not working, I can leave. You will not hold me here against my will or use threats of exposure to keep me compliant. I am entering this partnership freely or not at all." He considered this for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "Agreed. We will draw up a contract with those terms clearly stated. You have my word as a gentleman, for whatever that is worth to you." I took his hand. His grip was firm, his skin warm despite the coldness of his demeanor, and I felt calluses that matched my own. The hands of someone who worked with tools, who built things, who understood the intimate relationship between mind and matter. For just a moment, holding his hand, I felt something shift between us. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of something more dangerous. "When do we begin?" I asked, releasing his hand before the moment could stretch into something uncomfortable. "Tomorrow," he said. "I will send the carriage for you at 8. Bring whatever tools or materials you consider essential. Your workshop here will be ready by the time you arrive." He paused, then added, "And Miss Hartley? Thank you for trusting me with this. I know it cannot be easy." "I do not trust you," I said honestly, "but I trust your self-interest. And I trust that we both want the same thing, even if our reasons differ." He smiled again, and this time there was something almost human in it. "Then we understand each other perfectly. That is a good foundation for partnership." I left Ashford Hall as the winter sun was setting, the city's fog turning gold and amber in the dying light. The carriage carried me back through London's tangled streets, past factories pouring smoke into the gathering darkness, past gin houses and theaters and the great looming bulk of the British Museum. I watched it all through the window and felt as if I were seeing the city for the first time, or perhaps seeing myself for the first time. Not as Eleanor Hartley, invisible typist, not as E. Thornley, phantom genius, but as something new, undefined, full of terrifying possibility. When I reached my apartments, I found I could not settle. I tried to work, tried to sketch designs for the mechanical memory system I had been contemplating, but my mind kept returning to the Duke's workshop, to the tools, the machinery, the sense of purpose that permeated that space like electricity through copper wire. I had spent 2 years building things in secret, hiding my work, celebrating alone. The prospect of creating something in partnership, of having someone who understood, who could challenge me and push me and see me clearly, that prospect was intoxicating and frightening, because it meant I could no longer hide, not from the world and not from myself. That night, I dreamed of machinery. Great wheels turning, gears meshing, electrical current flowing through impossible circuits. And somewhere in the dream, a voice that sounded like the Duke's, cold and certain, asking me the question I could not answer. What are you really afraid of, Miss Hartley? The world's judgment? Or the possibility that you might actually succeed? I woke before dawn with my heart racing and the answer burning in my mind. I was afraid of both, but I was more afraid of spending the rest of my life wondering what I could have created if I had been brave enough to try. The carriage arrived precisely at 8. I was waiting with a leather case containing my best tools, my notebooks, my most precious designs. The driver greeted me with a nod and a small smile, as if he had expected nothing less than my arrival. As we rolled through London's morning streets, I watched the city wake and thought about the words the Duke had said yesterday. One way or another, the truth will come out. He was right. The question was whether I would be destroyed by that truth or defined by it. When we reached Ashford Hall, the Duke was already in his workshop, bent over a complex arrangement of gears and springs. He looked up when I entered, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been approval. Or perhaps just satisfaction that his gambit had worked. "Miss Hartley," he said, punctual again. "Good." He gestured to a cleared workbench near his own. "I have taken the liberty of setting up your space. If you need anything else, tell me and I will procure it." He paused, then added with something that was almost warmth, "Welcome to Ashford Hall. I suspect we are going to create something extraordinary together." I set down my case and looked around at the machinery, the tools, the impossible luxury of space and resources and time. Then I looked at the Duke, at this cold, brilliant man who had offered me both salvation and partnership with the same calculated precision he brought to engineering. I did not trust him, not entirely, but I trusted his vision, and I trusted that together we might just change everything. "Thank you, Your Grace," I said. "I will do my best not to disappoint." He smiled, sharp and brief. "You already have not. Now let us begin." And so we did. The first day passed in a blur of work and conversation, of technical debates and collaborative problem-solving. The Duke was exactly as promised, brutally honest but genuinely respectful, treating me as an equal colleague even when we disagreed. We worked on his pneumatic systems, on my electrical calculations, on projects that merged our different approaches into something neither of us could have created alone. And slowly, cautiously, I began to believe that perhaps this impossible partnership might actually work. That perhaps I had finally found someone who could see me clearly, all of me, the brilliance and the cowardice and everything in between, and choose collaboration over judgment. It was only later, as I returned home exhausted but strangely exhilarated, that I realized the true danger of what I had agreed to. The Duke of Ashford was cold, arrogant, impossible, and absolutely certain of his own brilliance. He was also the most fascinating man I had ever met. And somewhere between fixing his valve and arguing about gear ratios and watching his hands move with surgical precision over delicate machinery, I had made a terrible mistake. I had begun to care what he thought, to want his approval, his respect, his rare smiles, to imagine what it might be like if that cold intelligence ever warmed into something more human, more personal, more dangerous. I told myself it was simply professional admiration, that any inventor would be drawn to a mind like his. But late that night, alone in my workshop, I admitted the truth. I was not just drawn to his mind, I was drawn to him, to the man who hid behind machinery the same way I had hidden behind a false name, to the loneliness I recognized in his self-imposed isolation, to the possibility that perhaps we were more alike than either of us wanted to admit. And that possibility terrified me more than any threat of exposure ever could. Because the Duke of Ashford was not a man who loved. He was a man who invented. And I had no idea if he could tell the difference. 3 weeks into our partnership, the Duke and I invented something neither of us had anticipated. Not a machine, though we created plenty of those. We invented a language that existed only between us, spoken in gear ratios and electrical tolerances, in the way his hand moved to adjust a calibration spring exactly when I was about to suggest it, in the comfortable silence that fell between technical debates. We invented trust, or something close enough to it that I began to forget why I had ever been afraid. The work consumed me in ways I had never experienced. At Harrison and Webb, I had stolen hours after everyone left, working by candlelight on projects I could never claim. In my own workshop, I had created in isolation, celebrating victories alone and solving problems through sheer stubborn persistence. But here, in the Duke's domain, invention became conversation. He would present a problem, I would propose a solution, and suddenly we were both sketching variations, arguing possibilities, building prototypes with 4 hands instead of 2. The boundaries between his ideas and mine blurred until we stopped trying to separate them. We simply created together, and the results were extraordinary. We designed a prosthetic hand that could sense pressure through embedded springs and adjust its grip accordingly, delicate enough to hold an egg without cracking it, strong enough to lift a wrench. We built an automated library catalog system that used punch cards and mechanical sorting to locate any volume in seconds. We improved the difference engine's power consumption by 30% through a redesign of the switching mechanism that made me want to weep with the sheer elegance of its efficiency. Every morning I arrived at Ashford Hall thinking today would be ordinary work, and every evening I left exhausted, exhilarated, alive in ways I had not known were possible. But it was not just the inventions that changed me. It was him. Sebastian Blackwood, the Duke of Ashford, was not a man designed for comfort. He worked 14-hour days with barely a pause for meals. He held himself to impossible standards and everyone around him to nearly the same. He had no patience for excuses, no tolerance for sloppy thinking, and no interest whatsoever in social pleasantries or emotional displays. The household staff moved through Ashford Hall like ghosts, efficient and invisible, maintaining the machinery of his life without ever expecting acknowledgement. He was, by any reasonable measure, difficult, demanding, and utterly exhausting to be around. And yet I found myself watching for those rare moments when his guard slipped, when he would forget himself mid-calculation and run his hand through his dark hair, leaving it disheveled in a way that made him look younger, more human, when he would complete a particularly elegant design and allow himself the smallest smile of satisfaction before returning to his usual impassive expression. When he would catch me doing something clever and his eyes would light with genuine appreciation, no condescension, no surprise that a woman could think in ways he valued. Just recognition, just respect, just the acknowledgement that I was his equal in the only realm that mattered to him. I began to understand that his coldness was not cruelty. It was protection. He had built walls the same way he built machines, with careful precision and clear purpose. The world outside those walls was full of people who wanted things from him: his title, his wealth, his influence, his name attached to their ventures. But inside his workshop, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects, he could be simply himself, an inventor, a creator, a mind that thought in systems and solutions rather than social obligations and inherited expectations. And he had let me inside those walls. The realization came slowly, over days of working side by side, over technical discussions that stretched into philosophical debates, over shared meals eaten at the workbench, because neither of us wanted to stop long enough for proper dining. He was letting me see him, not the Duke, not the title, not the reputation. Just Sebastian, the man who understood machine language better than human language, who found beauty in mathematical elegance and purpose in systematic problem-solving, who was desperately, achingly lonely and had no idea how to fix it because loneliness was not a mechanical failure he could troubleshoot. I should not have cared. This was a professional arrangement, a strategic partnership designed to salvage my reputation and advance both our careers. Personal feelings were irrelevant, dangerous, a complication neither of us needed. I told myself this every morning on the carriage ride to Ashford Hall, and every evening I returned home with my resolve a little weaker, my defenses a little more compromised, my heart a little less my own. It was late November when everything shifted. We had been working on a pneumatic message system, a network of tubes that could transport small packages through a building using compressed air. The Duke wanted to install it throughout Ashford Hall, connecting the workshop to the library, the study, the various laboratories scattered across the estate. I had suggested improvements to the pressure regulation and routing mechanisms. We had built a prototype, and it worked beautifully, small capsules shooting through the brass tubes with satisfying speed and precision. "We should celebrate," I said impulsively, watching the latest capsule arrive at its destination with perfect accuracy. "This is significant work. The applications could revolutionize urban communication." The Duke looked at me as if I had suggested we sprout wings and fly to the moon. Celebrate how? I do not know. How do people usually celebrate achievements? Champagne? Dinner? A moment of satisfaction before moving to the next project? "I do not drink champagne," he said, "and dinner is merely fuel." He turned back to the tubes, already considering modifications. But then he paused and looked at me again, something uncertain in his expression. "What would you like to do, Miss Hartley? If you were to celebrate this achievement, what would bring you satisfaction?" The question surprised me. In all our weeks of working together, he had never asked what I wanted. He had assumed, correctly, that what I wanted was to invent, to create, to be respected for my work. But now he was asking about something else, something personal, and I found I did not know how to answer. "I would like," I said slowly, trying to articulate something I had not quite acknowledged even to myself, "to show someone what we have built. To share it with another person who could appreciate it. To have a witness to what we have accomplished." I paused, then added more quietly, "I have spent so long creating in secret. It would be nice just once to have someone see." His expression changed. Not softening exactly, but something shifting behind those gray eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a loneliness that matched his own. "Come with me," he said abruptly, and walked out of the workshop. I followed him through the corridors of Ashford Hall, through sections of the house I had never seen. We climbed stairs that grew narrower and steeper, passing from polished elegance into utilitarian simplicity, until finally we emerged onto the roof. London spread below us in the twilight, a vast confusion of gaslight and shadow, factory smoke and fog, the dark ribbon of the Thames winding through it all. The city was transforming in these years, old buildings torn down to make way for new construction, electric lights beginning to compete with gas, the future and the past tangled together in glorious chaos. From this height, I could see it all, the rhythm and flow of human endeavor, thousands of lives playing out in those lights, each one a story I would never know. "When I first inherited this house," the Duke said quietly, standing beside me at the roof's edge, "I used to come up here every evening. I would watch the city and try to understand it. All those people, living their small, ordinary lives, worrying about things that seemed completely incomprehensible to me. Social status, romantic attachments, what their neighbors thought of them. It made no sense. I could not see the system, could not identify the inputs and outputs, could not predict the outcomes based on any logical model. He paused. I still cannot. People remain the one problem I cannot solve. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you asked for a witness, he said, and I realized I have been doing the same thing you have. Creating in isolation, hiding not behind a false name, but behind these walls, behind my work, behind the reputation that keeps people at a distance. He turned to look at me, and in the fading light his face was less guarded than I had ever seen it. You were right, Miss Hartley. Achievement without witness is incomplete. We need someone to see us, to acknowledge that we exist, that we matter, that what we create has value beyond its mere function. He gestured to the city below. I brought you up here because I wanted you to see what I see, to share this perspective, to be my witness as I am yours. Something in my chest tightened painfully. I had thought I understood loneliness, but what I heard in his voice was worse than anything I had experienced. It was the loneliness of someone who had convinced himself that isolation was strength, that needing others was weakness, that the only safe place was inside the fortress of his own mind. And now, standing on this roof with the city spread below us and the night gathering around us, he was admitting that perhaps he had been wrong. I see you, I said quietly. I have seen you from the beginning. Not the Duke, not the reputation, just you. The man who understands things I understand, who creates things I want to create, who is brilliant and difficult and absolutely impossible to work with sometimes, and who I would not trade for any other partner in the world. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, very carefully, as if the words were fragile things that might break if mishandled, I have never had a friend, Miss Hartley. Not a real one. I do not know how to be one. But I believe if I were capable of such a thing, you would be that person. We are not friends, I said, and saw something flicker in his eyes that might have been hurt. We are something stranger than that. We are two people who speak the same language in a world that does not understand either of us. That is rarer than friendship. That is partnership in the truest sense. He nodded slowly. Then I am grateful for it. For you. For whatever this strange arrangement is that we have created. He turned back to the city. Do you know what I see when I look at all those lights, Miss Hartley? I see problems to be solved, inefficiencies to be corrected, systems that could be improved. But when you are here, I also see something else. I see beauty. Not because the city has changed, but because you make me remember that beauty matters. That elegance is not just aesthetic preference, but functional truth. That the best solutions are the ones that make the heart leap as well as the mind comprehend. I could not breathe, could not think, could only stand there beside him, watching the city lights flicker in the darkness and feeling everything I had been trying not to feel come crashing down around me. I was in love with him. Completely, impossibly, irrevocably in love with this cold, brilliant, emotionally damaged man who thought of people as problems and affection, as inefficiency. And somehow, despite every logical reason why this should be a disaster, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I should have said something, should have acknowledged what he had just revealed, should have told him what I was feeling, should have been honest the way he had been honest. But fear stopped my tongue, because if I said the words aloud, if I admitted the truth, everything would change. And I was not ready to lose this partnership, this strange, careful balance we had achieved, this safety we had found in each other's company. So I said nothing. I just stood beside him on the roof of Ashford Hall and watched London burn its lights against the darkness and pretended that my silence was not the worst kind of cowardice. We returned to the workshop without speaking, both of us retreating into the comfortable language of machinery and mathematics, of projects and problems that had clear solutions. But something had shifted between us. We both knew it. And over the following days, I felt it in every interaction, every shared glance, every moment of synchronicity when our minds moved together toward the same solution. The air between us was charged with possibility and danger in equal measure, and I did not know whether to lean into it or pull away. The decision was made for me 2 weeks later, when the outside world intruded on our careful isolation in the worst possible way. It began with a letter delivered to Ashford Hall, addressed to the Duke in a hand I did not recognize. He read it standing by his workbench, his expression growing progressively colder until his face might have been carved from ice. Then he handed it to me without comment. The letter was from Lord Pemberton, a prominent member of the Royal Society, and a rival inventor whose work the Duke had publicly critiqued the previous year. It was phrased with poisonous politeness, congratulating the Duke on his recent collaboration with his new assistant, expressing surprise that such a respectable gentleman would employ a woman in his workshop, and wondering whether it was appropriate for a woman to spend so much time unchaperoned in a bachelor's residence. The implication was clear. London society had noticed my presence at Ashford Hall, and they were starting to talk. I should have expected this. Should have realized that our partnership, innocent as it was, would look scandalous to a world that believed women had no place in scientific spaces and no business spending time alone with unmarried men. But I had been so absorbed in the work, so safe inside the walls of Ashford Hall, that I had forgotten the world outside still existed and still judged by its own narrow rules. "This is nothing," the Duke said flatly, taking the letter back and tossing it into the fire that heated the workshop. "Pemberton is a mediocre inventor and a worse human being. His opinion is irrelevant, but others will share it," I said quietly. "You know they will. A woman in your workshop, unchaperoned, day after day. Society will assume the worst. They will say, 'I am your mistress,' that you have compromised my reputation, that our collaboration is a scandal. And that scandal will destroy everything we have been working toward. How can I establish myself as a serious inventor if everyone believes I slept my way into your good graces?" His jaw tightened. "Then we will give them proof that our relationship is purely professional. We will publish our work immediately, establish you as a colleague rather than an assistant, demonstrate that your contributions are legitimate and substantial. Anyone with half a brain will see the quality of your work and recognize that their assumptions are wrong." "You are talking about people who believe women cannot do mathematics," I said. "They will not be convinced by evidence. They will believe what they want to believe, and what they want to believe is that I am a scandal." I stood up, feeling something breaking inside me. Perhaps this partnership was a mistake. Perhaps I should have faced exposure and accepted the consequences rather than allowing you to tie your reputation to mine. I have already ruined my own name by hiding behind E. Thornley. I will not ruin yours as well. He moved suddenly, closing the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands coming up to grip my shoulders. Not roughly, but firmly enough to stop me from turning away. "You are not ruining anything," he said, and there was something almost fierce in his voice. "You are creating things this world has never seen. You are brilliant and capable and deserving of recognition, and I will not let small-minded fools with empty lives and emptier minds take that away from you. Do you understand me? We will face this together. We will weather the scandal, if that is what it takes, and we will prove them wrong." I looked up at him, at the intensity burning in those gray eyes, and felt something shift dangerously in my chest. "Why do you care so much?" I whispered. "This is your reputation too. You could step back, distance yourself, let me face the consequences alone. Why are you fighting for this? For me?" For a moment, I thought he would not answer. Then he said, very quietly, his hands still on my shoulders, "Because I have spent my entire life believing that loneliness was strength, that needing no one made me powerful, that isolation was the price of excellence. And then you walked into my workshop and fixed my valve in 47 minutes, and for the first time in my life, I thought perhaps I had been wrong. Perhaps the best inventions, the most important creations, are not the machines we build, but the connections we forge. And perhaps, Miss Hartley, I do not want to go back to being alone." The words hung between us like a charged wire, dangerous and inevitable. I should have stepped back, should have maintained the professional distance that was the only thing protecting us both. But I could not move, could not look away, could not do anything but stand there with his hands on my shoulders and feel everything I had been trying not to feel come flooding through me like electrical current through copper. "Sebastian," I said, using his given name for the first time, and saw something flare in his eyes at the sound of it. "Eleanor," he replied, and my name in his voice was a revelation, intimate and impossible and absolutely forbidden. We stood like that for a long moment, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, could see the pulse beating at his throat, could watch his expression shift from control to something rawer and more dangerous. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that if either of us moved, if either of us gave in to what was building between us, everything would change. The partnership would become something else, something more complicated, something that could hurt us both in ways professional failure never could. So I stepped back, broke the connection, pulled away before the current could arc between us and burn everything to ash. "We cannot," I said, my voice shaking. "You know we cannot. The world already thinks the worst of us. If we give them truth to fuel their suspicions, they will destroy everything we have built. Your reputation, my credibility, all of it will be lost. We have to remain professional. We have to maintain the boundaries. We have to pretend this, whatever this is, does not exist." He let his hands drop, stepped back, and his face closed like a door slamming shut. "You are right, of course. Forgive me. That was inappropriate." He turned away, already retreating behind his walls. "It will not happen again." And just like that, the moment shattered. We returned to work, to the comfortable language of mechanics and mathematics, to the safe distance of professional collaboration. But something had broken between us, or perhaps something had been revealed that we could not unsee. We both knew what we felt, we both knew what we wanted, and we both knew we could not have it, because the world we lived in would punish us for taking it. That night, riding home through London's fog-shrouded streets, I pressed my hand against the window and watched the city blur past and hated everything about the unfair, impossible situation I had created for myself. I had hidden behind a man's name because I was afraid of being seen. And now I was being seen, truly seen, by the one man who mattered, and I was still hiding, still afraid, still trapped by rules and expectations and the terrible knowledge that love, real love, was the one problem engineering could not solve. The following weeks were torture. We continued working together, producing brilliant innovations, publishing papers under both our names, slowly building my public reputation as the Duke's colleague. But the easy synchronicity we had developed was gone, replaced by careful politeness and maintained distance. We did not speak of personal matters. We did not meet each other's eyes for longer than necessary. We certainly did not touch, even the casual brush of hands reaching for the same tool. We were professional, appropriate, exactly what society demanded. And I had never been so miserable in my life. The scandal, meanwhile, grew. More letters arrived, each one more pointed than the last. Anonymous notes appeared at my apartments, calling me terrible names, warning me to stay away from the Duke before I ruined him. I saw the way people looked at me when I appeared in public, the whispers that followed me through shops and theaters. My landlady began making pointed comments about proper behavior and suitable accommodations for women of good character. Even Mr. Harrison, who had profited handsomely from managing E. Thornley's business affairs, suggested that perhaps I should consider reducing my time at Ashford Hall until the gossip died down. But we pressed forward. We published 3 papers in December alone, each one demonstrating my technical capability, each one carrying both our names. The scientific community began to take notice. The Mechanical Science Quarterly ran an editorial praising the Duke's collaboration and noting that Miss Eleanor Hartley's contributions represented genuine innovation. Other journals followed. Slowly, grudgingly, the professional world began to acknowledge that perhaps a woman could contribute to mechanical science after all. Perhaps I was not just a scandal. Perhaps I was an inventor. It was working. The Duke's plan was working, and it was destroying us both in the process. Christmas approached, and Ashford Hall grew colder despite the fires that burned in every room. The Duke worked longer hours, spoke less, retreated deeper into himself. I matched his isolation, arriving early and leaving late, pouring everything I felt into the machines we created because I could not pour it into words. And every day the distance between us grew, even as we stood side by side at the workbench, even as our minds moved in perfect synchrony toward the same solutions, even as everything in me screamed to close that distance and damn the consequences. On Christmas Eve, I found him on the roof again, standing in the same spot where he had first shared his perspective with me. Snow was falling lightly, dusting the city in white, muffling sound, transforming London into something clean and new. I should have left him alone, should have respected his privacy. But I could not bear another moment of this careful distance, this professional pretense, this lie we were both living. I climbed the stairs and joined him on the roof, saying nothing, just standing beside him as snow collected in my hair and on my shoulders. We watched the city together in silence, and it felt like forgiveness, or perhaps just acknowledgement. We were both lonely. We were both trapped. And we were both pretending very hard that we could survive this way. I am going to claim E. Thornley, I said finally, my breath misting in the cold air. In the new year, I will publish the revelation, present the evidence, face whatever scandal follows. Your plan is working. I have enough reputation now to weather it. And I cannot keep hiding, not from the world, and not from what I feel. He turned to look at me, snow catching in his dark hair, his expression unreadable. And what do you feel? Eleanor? Everything I should not, I said. Everything that will ruin us both if I admit it. Everything that makes this partnership impossible to continue, and more impossible to end. He was quiet for so long, I thought he would not respond. Then he said very softly, I have built machines that can calculate faster than human thought. I have designed systems that improve efficiency by orders of magnitude. I have solved problems that other inventors claimed were impossible, but I cannot solve this. I cannot find a configuration where we both get what we want without losing everything else. The mathematics do not work. Then perhaps, I said, we need to accept that some problems do not have solutions, that some things are simply impossible, no matter how much we want them, that sometimes the cost of having what we want is higher than we can afford to pay. Or perhaps, he said, and there was something desperate in his voice, something raw that I had never heard before, perhaps the problem is not the mathematics but the constraints. Perhaps the system itself is wrong, the rules, the expectations, the society that insists a woman cannot be an inventor and a man cannot love someone he considers his equal. Perhaps what needs to change is not us, but the world. Then change the world, I said, and it came out almost like a challenge. You are the Duke of Ashford. You have power, influence, resources beyond measure. If you want to change the rules, change them. But do not ask me to wait while you figure out how. I have waited long enough. I have hidden long enough. In the new year, I reveal the truth about E. Thornley, and then I will leave Ashford Hall. Because I cannot continue working beside you, knowing what we feel, and knowing we can never act on it. It hurts too much. The words were out before I could stop them. The truth I had been hiding finally spoken aloud. And the moment they left my lips, I saw his expression crack, saw the control he maintained so carefully finally shatter. Do not leave, he said, and his voice broke on the words. Please. I know I am impossible. I know I am cold and difficult and emotionally incapable of expressing what I feel in any way that makes sense. But Eleanor, you are the only person who has ever looked at me and seen something worth knowing. You are the only one who speaks my language, who understands the way I think, who makes me want to be more than just my work. And I am terrified, absolutely terrified, of losing that, of losing you. Then stop pretending this is just partnership, I said. Stop pretending we are just colleagues. Stop hiding behind professional distance when we both know this stopped being professional weeks ago. Tell me the truth, Sebastian. What do you want? He looked at me with snow falling around us and the city spread below and his walls finally, completely down. I want you, he said simply. I want to work beside you and argue with you and watch you fix things I cannot solve and feel proud when you accomplish something brilliant and be the one you tell first when you have a new idea. I want to stop pretending I do not care what you think of me. I want to stop pretending that loving you is not the most logical thing I have ever done, because you are extraordinary and anyone with functioning vision can see it. He took a breath. But I also know that loving you puts your reputation at risk, and I will not be the reason your work is dismissed or your name is destroyed. So I am trapped between wanting you and wanting you to succeed, and I do not know how to have both. The snow fell harder, and my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own voice. Then we make it possible, I said. We change the rules. We give them so much evidence of my capability that they cannot dismiss me even if they know about us. We publish the E. Thornley revelation with such overwhelming proof that no one can question it. We establish me as an inventor in my own right, completely separate from you. And then, when that foundation is solid, when I am secure, when they cannot take it away from me, then we stop hiding what we feel. We do it carefully. We do it strategically. But we do it together. He reached out, very slowly, and took my hand. His fingers were cold from the winter air, and the touch sent electricity racing up my arm. Can you be patient? He asked. Can you trust that I am trying to protect you, not push you away? I can be patient, I said, but only if you promise me something. Anything. Promise me that when this is done, when I have claimed my work and established my reputation and made it impossible for them to dismiss me, promise me you will not decide that professional respect is enough, that you will not retreat behind your walls again and pretend this moment never happened. Promise me, Sebastian, that you will let yourself want this. Want me. Want us. He pulled me closer until I could feel the warmth of him through our coats, until his other hand came up to cup my face with a gentleness I had not known he possessed. I promise, he said. And then very carefully, as if asking permission, he lowered his lips to mine. The kiss was brief, chaste even, barely more than a brush of warmth against my mouth. But it felt like a promise, like a confession, like every beautiful machine we had ever built together distilled into a single perfect moment. When he pulled back, I saw in his eyes something I had never thought to see there. Hope. We stood together in the snow, hands clasped, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear. I felt possibility. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be scandals, challenges, people who tried to tear us apart or reduce what we had to something sordid and simple. But we had a plan. We had each other. And we had the stubbornness that came with being two inventors who refused to accept that problems were unsolvable. January would bring the revelation, the truth about E. Thornley, the exposure I had feared for so long. But it would also bring freedom, the freedom to claim my work, the freedom to stand beside this impossible man without hiding, the freedom to love him openly if we could just be patient enough to build the foundation that would make it possible. As we walked back down from the roof, his hand still holding mine, I thought about all the inventions we had created together. The prosthetics, the sorting systems, the improvements to the difference engine. But perhaps the most important thing we had built was simply this: trust, understanding, the belief that together we could solve even the impossible problems, that love and work were not opposites, but partners, that the best creations came not from isolation, but from connection. The Duke of Ashford had said he could not solve the equation of us. But perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps the solution had been there all along, waiting for us to be brave enough to reach for it. And perhaps, just perhaps, we were finally ready. The new year arrived with ice and iron, London frozen solid under a January sky that matched the Duke's eyes. We had 2 weeks to prepare for what we were calling, with grim humor, the Great Revelation. 2 weeks to gather evidence, prepare demonstrations, construct an argument so airtight that even the most skeptical member of the Royal Society would have to acknowledge the truth. 2 weeks to build the foundation that would allow me to claim E. Thornley without destroying everything I had worked for. 2 weeks to prepare for the moment that would change everything. We worked with desperate intensity, cataloging every patent filed under E. Thornley's name, every technical drawing, every specification. Sebastian hired a handwriting expert who confirmed, with scientific precision, that the annotations on the original difference engine patent matched samples of my handwriting perfectly. We assembled letters from manufacturers who had worked with E. Thornley, noting that all correspondence had passed through Harrison and Webb's offices and that the technical instructions bore my characteristic phrasing. We prepared demonstrations of the difference engine's operation, including modifications only the original designer could have conceived. Every piece of evidence was documented, verified, made bulletproof. But evidence was not enough. We needed witnesses, people of standing who would vouch for my capability, who would testify that I possessed the technical knowledge to have created the work I claimed. Sebastian began methodically, almost ruthlessly, inviting select members of the scientific community to Ashford Hall. One at a time, carefully chosen, he brought them to the workshop and introduced them to his colleague, Miss Eleanor Hartley. Then he would present a technical problem and ask me to solve it while they watched. It was performance, calculated and strategic. I hated it, but I understood its necessity. Professor Michaels from Cambridge came first, a silver-haired mathematician with kind eyes and an open mind. Sebastian gave me a complex differential equation to solve, one with practical applications to gear ratios. I solved it in 20 minutes, showing my work on a chalkboard we had installed for exactly this purpose, explaining each step clearly enough that even a non-specialist could follow the logic. Professor Michaels watched with growing fascination, asked penetrating questions, and left declaring that Miss Hartley possessed one of the finest mathematical minds he had encountered in 40 years of teaching. Dr. Hammond from the Royal College of Engineering came next. Sebastian presented him with a malfunctioning pneumatic valve, one we had deliberately sabotaged with a subtle flaw that would be nearly impossible to detect without deep understanding of pressure dynamics. I diagnosed the problem in 15 minutes, explained the physics involved, and implemented the fix, while Dr. Hammond took notes and muttered appreciative comments about elegant problem-solving. By the end of the first week, we had 6 respectable witnesses, all men of science, all prepared to testify that Miss Eleanor Hartley possessed genuine technical capability. It was not proof that I was E. Thornley, not yet, but it was proof that I could be, that the claim was plausible, that dismissing me as a fraud would require dismissing the professional judgment of some of the most respected scientists in England. "We are building a fortress," Sebastian said one evening as we reviewed our progress. "Layer by layer, wall by wall. When we present your claim, they will have to siege it properly or look like fools for dismissing it out of hand." "And if they siege it anyway?" I asked. "If they decide that no amount of evidence can overcome their fundamental belief that women cannot do what I have done?" "Then we weather the siege," he said simply. "We continue producing work. We continue publishing. We prove, through sheer accumulated evidence, that their beliefs are wrong. It may take months. It may take years. But we will win, Eleanor, because we are right, and the truth has a way of emerging eventually. I wanted to believe him. But I had lived in a world that dismissed women's capabilities for my entire life. I knew how easily people could ignore evidence that contradicted their comfortable prejudices. Still, I took comfort in his certainty, in the systematic way he approached every problem as if it were merely a mechanical failure that could be diagnosed and corrected. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps truth was simply a matter of providing enough proof, of being patient enough to let the evidence accumulate. Perhaps love itself was like that. A slow accumulation of moments, of trust, of shared understanding, until the weight of it became undeniable. We were careful to maintain propriety during this time. No more stolen moments on rooftops, no more touches that lasted longer than professional courtesy demanded. The household staff were always nearby, witnesses to our exemplary behavior. We kept our conversations technical, our interactions appropriate. But there were small things, invisible to outside eyes, that sustained me through the tension. The way his hand would brush mine when passing me a tool, lingering just a fraction of a second too long. The way he would catch my eye across the workshop and smile. A real smile that transformed his whole face. The way he said my name, Eleanor, with a gentleness that made it sound like music. We were falling in love in the spaces between propriety. In the language of machinery and mathematics, in shared glances and careful restraint, in the understanding that what we felt mattered enough to protect, even at the cost of immediate gratification. It was agonizing. It was perfect. It was the most Victorian courtship imaginable, all suppressed passion and meaningful silence and the slow burn of wanting someone you could not yet have. And then, 10 days before the scheduled revelation, everything began to unravel. The first warning came in the form of a letter delivered, not to Sebastian, but to me, at my apartments. The envelope was expensive cream paper, sealed with black wax bearing an unfamiliar crest. Inside was a single sheet covered in elegant handwriting that dripped with poison. "Miss Hartley," it began, "I am writing to warn you, out of Christian charity, that your current arrangement with the Duke of Ashford has attracted notice from those who have his best interests at heart. His Grace's family is deeply concerned about the impropriety of your constant presence at Ashford Hall, and the damage this scandal may do to his standing in society. While we understand that His Grace believes he is advancing scientific progress through this collaboration, we fear he is being manipulated by a woman of questionable character who seeks to attach herself to his fortune and title through professional association. We must ask you, for his sake, to withdraw from this arrangement immediately. If you truly respect the Duke, you will not allow your selfish ambitions to ruin his reputation." The letter was signed, the Dowager Duchess of Ashford, Sebastian's mother. A woman I had never met, who lived on the family's country estate, and whom Sebastian rarely mentioned. But clearly a woman who paid attention to London gossip, and who had decided I was a threat to her son's standing. I showed Sebastian the letter that evening. He read it standing by the workshop fire, his face growing progressively colder until his expression could have frozen water. Then, without comment, he fed the letter to the flames and watched it burn. "My mother," he said flatly, "has never understood that I do not care about standing in society. She has spent 30 years trying to make me into a proper duke, attending balls and dinners and parliamentary sessions. She has never accepted that I prefer machines to people." He turned to me. "Ignore the letter. My mother's opinion is irrelevant. She does not control my life or my choices. But she can make things difficult," I said quietly. "If your family turns against this revelation, if they publicly distance themselves from you because of your association with me, it will give ammunition to everyone who wants to dismiss us as scandalous." "Let them try," he said. "I have my own fortune, independent of the family estate. I have my own reputation, built on work, not birthright. If my mother chooses to disapprove, that is her prerogative. But I will not allow her prejudices to dictate my actions." He came closer, took my hand. We proceed as planned. Nothing changes. But it did change, because the Dowager's letter was only the beginning. Over the next 3 days, pressure mounted from multiple directions. Sebastian received visits from distant relatives, all expressing concern about his reputation. Mr. Harrison arrived at Ashford Hall unannounced, nervous and sweating, to inform me that several of E. Thornley's business partners had heard rumors about the upcoming revelation and were threatening to dissolve their contracts if it proved true that they had been dealing with a woman. The actor we had hired to portray E. Thornley disappeared, leaving a note saying he wanted no part of the coming scandal. And worst of all, someone, we never discovered who, sent an anonymous letter to the Times suggesting that the Duke of Ashford's recent collaboration with Miss Eleanor Hartley was romantic rather than professional in nature, and questioning whether any work attributed to her might actually be his, given to a woman of questionable morals in exchange for other considerations. The implication was clear and devastating. They were going to claim I was Sebastian's mistress and that he was crediting me with his own work to protect my reputation after ruining it. The revelation we had planned so carefully, the one that was supposed to establish me as a legitimate inventor, would instead be twisted into proof of scandal. Everything we had built, every careful witness and piece of evidence, could be dismissed as an elaborate cover-up for an affair. I found Sebastian in the workshop at midnight, still working, his movements sharp and angry. He was disassembling a clock with more force than necessary, screws scattering across the workbench. I watched from the doorway for a moment, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the barely controlled fury in the way he moved. "We need to postpone," I said quietly. He froze, a screwdriver still in his hand. "No, Sebastian, they are going to destroy us. They have twisted the narrative before we can even present it. If we go forward now, everything we say will be filtered through their assumptions. They will not hear evidence. They will only hear scandal. Then we make them hear us," he said, turning to face me. "We present our case so clearly, so completely, that their prejudices become irrelevant. We bury them in facts." "Facts do not matter when people have already made up their minds," I said. "You know this. You have spent your entire life watching people believe what they want to believe, regardless of evidence. I cannot win this fight, not against this kind of coordinated opposition. Your family, the business partners, the newspapers, all of them aligned against us. The mathematics are not in our favor." "The mathematics," he said, his voice cold, "are not the point. The point is that you are brilliant and you deserve recognition, and I will not allow small-minded people with small-minded prejudices to take that from you." He set down the screwdriver with careful control. "Tell me, Eleanor, do you want to postpone because you genuinely believe it is strategically wise, or because you are afraid?" The question hit like a physical blow. Because of course I was afraid. Terrified, actually. Afraid of exposure, of ridicule, of losing everything I had worked for. Afraid of dragging Sebastian down with me, of ruining his reputation through association, of proving his mother right about my selfish ambitions. Afraid that perhaps I did not deserve recognition, that perhaps my work was not good enough, that perhaps the voice in my head that whispered "you are a fraud" was telling the truth. But I was also angry. Angry at a world that made it impossible for women to create without hiding. Angry at the people who would dismiss my work because of my sex. Angry at myself for letting fear control me for so long. I had spent 2 years as E. Thornley, invisible and safe and slowly suffocating. I had promised myself that the new year would bring truth, freedom, the courage to stand in my own light. And now, at the first serious obstacle, I was ready to retreat again. "You are right," I said finally. "I am afraid. I have been afraid my entire life, and I am tired of it. I am tired of hiding, tired of second-guessing myself, tired of letting other people's opinions determine what I can and cannot do. So no, we do not postpone. We go forward as planned. And if they want to dismiss me as a scandal, then they will have to do it while looking at the evidence. While watching me demonstrate capability they claim I cannot possess. While explaining how I could have created work that multiple experts have verified as genuine innovation, let them try to dismiss that. Let them try to reduce me to mistress and fraud when the facts say otherwise. And if they succeed? I took a breath. Then at least I will know I tried. That I stood up and claimed my work and refused to hide anymore. That has to be worth something. He crossed the workshop in 3 strides and pulled me into his arms, holding me tight enough that I could feel his heart pounding against my chest. "You are the bravest person I have ever met," he said against my hair. "And I am in awe of you. Every single day, I am in awe." We stood like that for a long moment, finding strength in each other's presence, gathering courage from the simple fact that we were not facing this alone. Then we pulled apart, just enough to see each other clearly, and I saw in his eyes the same determination I felt building in myself. We would do this. We would face the scandal, the skepticism, the coordinated opposition. We would present our evidence and let the chips fall where they may. And whatever happened, we would do it together. The remaining week passed in a blur of final preparations. We rehearsed my presentation until I could deliver it in my sleep, anticipating every possible objection, every question, every attempt to discredit me. We gathered our witnesses and prepared them for the hostile reception they might face. We informed the press that the Duke of Ashford would be making an important announcement at the Winter Gala of the Royal Scientific Society, knowing the controversy would ensure attendance from everyone who mattered in London's scientific community. We were building toward a confrontation, deliberately and strategically, because anything less would allow our opponents to dismiss the revelation quietly. But in the quiet moments, when the preparations were done and the workshop was silent, Sebastian and I would sit together by the fire and simply talk about our childhoods, our disappointments, our dreams. I learned that his father had been a distant man who valued duty over affection, and that Sebastian had retreated into machinery because machines made sense in ways people never did. He learned that my mother had died in childbirth and my father had raised me alone, a scholar who taught me mathematics and science because he had no sons and saw no reason his daughter should be less educated. We shared our loneliness, our fears, our stubborn refusal to accept the world's limitations, and slowly, carefully, we built something more solid than any machine we had ever created. We built trust, we built love, we built a partnership that could weather whatever storm was coming. The night before the gala, I could not sleep. I lay in my narrow bed in my Bloomsbury apartments, staring at the ceiling, running through the presentation in my mind one more time. I thought about all the people who would be in that ballroom tomorrow, watching me, judging me, ready to dismiss or destroy, depending on their prejudices. I thought about Sebastian, who had risked his reputation to give me this chance. I thought about E. Thornley, the phantom inventor I had created, and how tomorrow I would finally let him die. And I thought about the girl I had been 3 years ago, sitting in a cramped room above a watchmaker's shop, deciding to cross out her own name because she believed the world would never accept her. I wished I could go back to that moment and tell her what I knew now. That hiding would not keep her safe, that claiming her work would not destroy her, that the cost of invisibility was higher than the cost of exposure, that love and partnership were not weakness but strength, that she was enough exactly as she was, and that someday she would stand in a ballroom full of people who doubted her and prove them wrong. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning, the revelation, the moment of truth that would either establish me as a legitimate inventor or destroy me as a fraud. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, I made myself a promise. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would not apologize for what I had created. I would not diminish my work or make myself smaller to ease other people's discomfort. I would stand in my truth and let the consequences unfold. Because I was Eleanor Hartley. I was E. Thornley. I was an inventor. And I was done hiding. A knock at my door startled me from my thoughts. I rose, pulled on a dressing gown, and opened it to find Sebastian standing in the hallway, still dressed for the street, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. "What are you doing here?" I whispered, acutely aware of how inappropriate this was. A man at my door past midnight, my reputation already hanging by a thread. "I could not sleep," he said simply, "and I thought you might not be able to either. May I come in? Just for a moment. I need to tell you something before tomorrow." I should have said no, should have sent him away, but I stepped aside and let him enter, closing the door softly behind him. He moved to my small window, looking out at the sleeping city, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "When I was 12 years old," he said quietly, "my father took me to a session of Parliament. He wanted me to see how government worked, to understand my future responsibilities as a duke. I sat in the gallery for 4 hours, listening to men debate a bill about factory safety regulations. Men who had never set foot in a factory, who had no understanding of machinery or worker conditions, making decisions that would affect thousands of lives. And I remember thinking, this is insane. These people are operating without data, without evidence, without any systematic understanding of the problems they are trying to solve. They are just guessing, based on prejudice and self-interest and political calculation. And everyone treats this as normal, as acceptable, as the way things should be done." He turned to face me. That was the day I decided I would rather work with machines than people, because machines do not lie. They do not operate on prejudice. They respond to physical laws, to evidence, to reality. You can trust them in ways you can never trust people. He crossed the small room, stopped just close enough that I could feel the cold radiating from his clothes, smell the winter air he had brought with him. "But you changed that, Eleanor. You made me believe that perhaps some people can be trusted, that perhaps the world can be changed through evidence and persistence and refusing to accept limitations. That perhaps I was wrong to retreat entirely into machinery, because the most important problems, the ones that really matter, require human collaboration, human connection, human love." He reached out, very carefully, and took my hand. "Tomorrow, you are going to walk into that ballroom and claim your work. You are going to face people who want you to fail, who need you to fail, because your success threatens everything they believe about the world. And it is going to be difficult and frightening and possibly devastating. But I need you to know something before you do it." "What?" I whispered. "That regardless of what happens tomorrow, regardless of whether they accept your claim or destroy you for making it, I am proud of you. I am honored to know you. And I love you, completely and without reservation, in ways I did not know I was capable of loving anyone. You have made me better, Eleanor. You have made me braver. And tomorrow, whatever you need, whatever support or defense, or simply someone to stand beside you, I will be there. Always." The words broke something open inside me, some last defense I had been maintaining against the terrible vulnerability of loving someone this much. I pulled him closer, rose on my toes, and kissed him with all the fear and hope and desperate courage I was trying to summon for tomorrow. He kissed me back with surprising gentleness, his cold hands coming up to cup my face, and for a moment the world narrowed to just this, just us. Just the simple truth that we had found each other in a world that tried very hard to keep people like us separate. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "That was probably very inappropriate," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Probably," I agreed, "but I find I do not care anymore about what is appropriate. Tomorrow I am going to stand in front of London's entire scientific community and admit I have been living a lie for 2 years. I think my reputation can survive one midnight kiss." He laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded, and I realized I had never heard him laugh before. The sound was beautiful, transformative, a glimpse of the man he might be if he allowed himself to be happy. Then let me make it worth the damage to your reputation, he said, and kissed me again, deeper this time, with the kind of passion that made me forget why propriety had ever mattered. We stood together in my small parlor as the city slept around us, stealing this moment of intimacy before the storm tomorrow would bring. And when he finally left, slipping out into the snowy night with one last lingering glance, I felt something I had not felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope that perhaps the story could have a happy ending after all, that perhaps love and work were not mutually exclusive, that perhaps tomorrow would bring not destruction, but transformation, that perhaps finally I could step into the light. I slept then, deeply and dreamlessly, and woke to the pale winter sun streaming through my window. The day of the revelation had arrived. The day I would claim E. Thornley, reclaim my name, and discover whether courage was enough to change the world. The day I would stand beside Sebastian and prove that some partnerships were stronger than scandal, that some truths were more important than propriety, that some women refused to be invisible no matter how hard the world tried to erase them. I dressed carefully in a gown of deep emerald green, a color I had never worn before, bold and beautiful and entirely inappropriate for someone trying to appear humble and professional. But I was done with appearing humble, done with making myself smaller to ease other people's discomfort. Today I would be seen, truly seen, and whatever came after, at least I would know I had been brave enough to try. The carriage arrived at noon. Sebastian was inside, dressed formally in black and white, looking every inch the Duke. But when he saw me, his expression softened into something warm and proud and entirely human. "You look magnificent," he said. "I look terrified," I corrected. "That too," he agreed. "But magnificently terrified, ready to change the world?" I took his hand, felt the familiar calluses, the warmth, the strength, as ready as I will ever be. The carriage rolled through London's afternoon streets toward the Royal Scientific Society Hall, toward the Gala, toward the moment that would define everything that came after. And sitting beside Sebastian, our hands clasped together, I felt something settle in my chest. Peace, perhaps, or simply acceptance. Whatever happened tonight, I would face it honestly, bravely, as myself. Eleanor Hartley, E. Thornley, inventor. And that, finally, would have to be enough. The Royal Scientific Society Hall blazed with light, every gas lamp and electrical fixture burning at full intensity, transforming the winter evening into artificial day. I stood in the entrance beside Sebastian, watching the crowd gather inside, and felt my courage waver for just a moment. Every important figure in London's scientific community was here. Inventors, engineers, academics, industrialists, all dressed in their finest evening clothes, all expecting the Duke of Ashford to make some announcement about a new breakthrough or collaboration, none of them expecting what I was about to reveal. Sebastian must have felt my hesitation because his hand found mine, hidden in the folds of my emerald gown. "You are extraordinary," he said quietly, "meant only for me. And tonight, everyone will see it. Are you ready?" I looked at him, at this impossible man who had seen through my deceptions and my fears straight to the truth underneath, who had offered me partnership and respect and something far more dangerous than either. I thought about the girl who had crossed out her own name 2 years ago, and the woman I had become in the space between then and now. I thought about everything I had built while hiding, and everything I might build if I could finally step into the light. "I am ready," I said. We entered together, and the crowd's reaction was immediate. Conversations faltered, heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire. The Duke of Ashford arriving with Miss Eleanor Hartley, the woman whose presence at Ashford Hall had been the subject of so much scandal. They watched us with hungry eyes, eager for confirmation that the gossip was true, that there was something improper between us, that we would provide them with entertainment through our downfall. "Let them watch," Sebastian said calmly, guiding me through the crowd. Let them wonder. They will have their answers soon enough. We made our way to the front of the great hall, where a small stage had been erected for presentations. The room was magnificent, all polished marble and gilded fixtures, with great windows overlooking the Thames, now dark beyond. Display tables lined the walls, covered with the latest inventions. Clockwork automatons, electrical generators, calculating machines, all the marvels of modern science arranged like offerings in a temple of progress. My difference engine, the original prototype, sat on the central table, gleaming brass and copper wire. The machine that had started everything. The crowd settled as the Society's president, Sir Edmund Blackwell, took the stage. He was a portly man with magnificent whiskers and an air of self-importance, the kind of man who believed his position gave him wisdom. He welcomed everyone, made the usual pleasantries about scientific advancement and British innovation, then turned to introduce the evening's main presentation. "We are honored," he announced, "to have with us tonight His Grace the Duke of Ashford, whose contributions to mechanical science are well known to all of us. The Duke has requested time to make an important announcement regarding recent innovations developed in collaboration with his colleague." He gestured toward us. "Your Grace, the floor is yours." Sebastian rose and took the stage with the calm confidence of a man who had never doubted his right to be heard. I followed, climbing the steps with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might escape my chest entirely. We had rehearsed this moment a dozen times, planned every word, every gesture, every piece of evidence we would present. But standing here, facing hundreds of skeptical faces, all of our careful preparation felt suddenly inadequate. "Thank you, Sir Edmund," Sebastian began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I have indeed requested this opportunity to make an announcement, but I must correct one misapprehension. The innovations I wish to discuss tonight are not the result of collaboration. They are entirely the work of one person." He turned to me, and there was something fierce and proud in his expression. "Miss Eleanor Hartley, who stands beside me, is the sole inventor of the Thornley difference engine, and all subsequent patents filed under that name. She is, in fact, E. Thornley, and tonight we are here to prove it." The silence that followed was absolute. Then the room erupted. Gasps, angry muttering, shocked exclamations, the sound of 100 conversations starting simultaneously. Sir Edmund looked apoplectic, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. Several men rose from their seats, clearly preparing to object. But Sebastian simply stood there, waiting for the noise to die down, completely unperturbed by the chaos he had unleashed. "This is preposterous," Sir Edmund finally managed to sputter. "E. Thornley is a respected member of this society. Are you suggesting he is a woman? That we have been deceived?" "I am suggesting nothing," Sebastian said coldly. "I am stating a fact, supported by evidence which we are prepared to present. If you will allow us to continue, we will demonstrate the truth of this claim beyond any reasonable doubt. Unless, of course, you would prefer to dismiss it without examination, in which case I will note for the record that the Royal Society refuses to consider evidence that contradicts its prejudices." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Sir Edmund clearly wanted to refuse, wanted to shut down this scandalous revelation before it could progress further. But too many eyes were watching, too many important figures waiting to see how he would respond. If he dismissed us without hearing our evidence, he would look like a coward or a fool. Reluctantly, he gestured for Sebastian to continue. Sebastian nodded to me. It was time. I stepped forward, feeling every eye in the room fixed on me, feeling the weight of their skepticism, like a physical pressure. But I also felt Sebastian's presence beside me, solid and unwavering, and I drew strength from that. "My name is Eleanor Margaret Hartley," I began, and my voice was steadier than I expected. "For the past 2 years, I have published mechanical and electrical engineering innovations under the name E. Thornley. I did this because I believed, correctly as it turns out, that work attributed to a woman would not receive fair consideration from the scientific community. I am here tonight to reclaim my work, to present evidence of my authorship, and to challenge this community to judge my innovations on their merit rather than my sex. I gestured to the display table where we had arranged our evidence. The original patent application, with handwriting samples showing my characteristic notation style, letters from manufacturers, all addressed to E. Thornley, care of Harrison and Webb, where I worked as a typist. Technical drawings with corrections in my hand, testimonials from Professor Michaels, Dr. Hammond, and 4 other witnesses who had observed my technical capability firsthand. But evidence on paper was not enough. I knew that. They needed to see me work, needed to watch me demonstrate knowledge that could not be faked or borrowed or stolen from some man working in the shadows. I have prepared a demonstration, I said. The difference engine currently produces accurate calculations for up to 6 digits. I will modify it here tonight to process 8 digits. This will require redesigning the carry mechanism and adding 2 additional register wheels. If I am truly E. Thornley, if I am the inventor of this machine, then I should be able to make these modifications without consultation or reference materials. I will do so now, in front of all of you, and you may judge whether what you observe is consistent with genuine technical expertise or clever fraud. I moved to the difference engine, my hands already reaching for the tools Sebastian had prepared. The crowd pressed closer, forming a tight circle around me, watching with expressions ranging from fascination to open hostility. I could hear their whispered comments, their skepticism, their assumption that I would fail. But I pushed it all away and focused on the machine before me, on the familiar weight of tools in my hands, on the pure, clean logic of gears and wire and mathematical precision. I worked quickly but carefully, narrating each step so they could follow my reasoning. Removing the original carry mechanism, explaining why its current design limited the register to 6 digits. Sketching the modification on a chalkboard, showing the mathematical proof that the new configuration would handle 8. Installing additional gears with precision tolerances, adjusting spring tensions, calibrating the electrical contacts. My hands moved with the confidence of long practice, and as I worked, I felt something shift in the room. The hostility quieted. The skepticism gave way to concentration. They were watching me think in real time, watching me solve problems, watching me create, and some of them, at least, were beginning to wonder if perhaps they had been wrong. 40 minutes later, I stepped back from the modified machine. The test, I said, feeding a complex calculation into the input mechanism and cranking the handle. The difference engine whirred to life, gears meshing, electrical contacts sparking, and after a moment produced its result. 8 digits, perfectly calculated. I ran 3 more test problems, each more complex than the last. Every calculation was flawless. The machine worked exactly as I had predicted. The silence was different now. Not hostile, but stunned. Several men were taking notes. Professor Michaels was nodding with satisfaction. Even Sir Edmund looked uncertain, as if the foundations of his worldview were cracking beneath his feet. Sebastian returned to the stage. "You have now witnessed Miss Hartley demonstrate technical expertise of the highest order," he said. "You have seen evidence of her handwriting on the original patents. You have heard testimony from respected colleagues who have observed her capability. You have documentation proving that all E. Thornley correspondence passed through offices where Miss Hartley was employed, and you have watched her modify, in front of your eyes, a machine that only its original designer could understand well enough to improve." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "The question before you is simple. Will you acknowledge the evidence? Or will you cling to your prejudices and dismiss a brilliant inventor because she does not conform to your expectations?" A man stood in the front row, elderly and distinguished, with steel-gray hair and penetrating eyes. I recognized him as Lord Pemberton, the rival who had sent the poisonous letter weeks ago. "If this is true," he said, his voice dripping with contempt, then Miss Hartley has perpetrated a fraud. She has lied to this society, deceived us all, made fools of everyone who praised E. Thornley's work. Why should we reward such dishonesty with recognition? Because, a new voice said from the back of the hall, the alternative was silence. I turned to see a woman rising from her seat, middle-aged and elegantly dressed, with intelligent eyes and a determined expression. "I am Dr. Catherine Ashworth," she said, "one of perhaps 3 women in this room tonight, and one of even fewer with formal scientific training. I hold a medical degree from the University of Zurich, as British universities would not admit me. I have published 14 papers on anatomy and physiology, 12 of them under my brother's name, because editors would not accept work from a woman." She moved through the crowd toward the stage. "Miss Hartley did not deceive you out of malice or greed. She deceived you because it was the only way her work would be heard. Because we all know, though most of you pretend otherwise, that women's contributions to science are systematically dismissed, ignored, or attributed to men." She turned to face Lord Pemberton. "You ask why we should reward dishonesty? I ask why we should punish capability. Miss Hartley has created work of genuine value. The only question that matters is whether that work stands on its own merit. And I believe tonight's demonstration proves it does." Other voices rose in support, some from unexpected quarters. Professor Michaels stood to describe my mathematical ability in glowing terms. A manufacturer testified that E. Thornley's technical specifications had been flawless, resulting in the most reliable calculating engines his company had ever produced. Even Sir Edmund reluctantly admitted that the evidence was compelling and that perhaps the society needed to reconsider its policies regarding female membership and recognition. But the opposition was fierce. Lord Pemberton continued to argue that accepting my claim would be endorsing fraud. Others insisted that even if I had genuine capability, my deception disqualified me from recognition. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford, who I had not realized was in attendance, stood to declare that her son was being manipulated by a scheming woman of loose morals, and that this entire spectacle was proof of scandal rather than science. Sebastian's face went cold at his mother's words. He stepped to the edge of the stage, and when he spoke, his voice cut through the noise like a blade. "You have questioned Miss Hartley's honesty, her capability, her character. You have suggested she is a fraud, a schemer, a woman of loose morals. Allow me to address these accusations directly." He paused, and I saw something shift in his expression, some wall coming down, some decision made. "Miss Hartley is the most honest person I have ever met. She hid her name because you made it impossible for her to claim her work openly. She demonstrated capability tonight that most of you could not match if you dedicated years to the attempt. And as for her character," his voice softened slightly, "Miss Hartley has spent 2 years creating innovations that advance human knowledge while receiving no credit, no recognition, no acknowledgement of her efforts. She has worked beside me for months, maintaining impeccable propriety even as society assumed the worst, protecting both our reputations while building a body of work that will outlast all of us. She is brilliant, principled, and deserving of respect. And I am proud, profoundly proud, to stand beside her tonight. I am proud to call her my colleague. And I am proud to call her something more." He turned to me, and in front of hundreds of people, in front of his mother and London's entire scientific community and anyone who might use this against us, he took my hand and raised it to his lips. "I am proud," he said clearly, "to call her the woman I love." The room exploded, gasps, shouts, the Dowager Duchess crying out in horror. But Sebastian ignored it all, his eyes locked on mine. I had not asked him to make this declaration, had not wanted him to risk his reputation by acknowledging feelings that society would deem scandalous. But looking at him now, seeing the absolute certainty in his face, I understood. He was done hiding too, done pretending, done allowing other people's prejudices to dictate how he lived his life. We were standing together in our truth, complete and unashamed, and whatever came after would be faced as partners. I love you too, I said, loudly enough for the front rows to hear. And I would not trade this moment, this honesty, this courage, for all the easy approval in the world. Sir Edmund tried to restore order, banging his gavel and calling for quiet, but the chaos continued. Some people were leaving in disgust, scandalized by both the professional revelation and the personal one. Others were arguing heatedly about whether my work should be accepted. Still others were simply watching, fascinated, as if we were performers in some elaborate theatrical production, rather than real people fighting for recognition and respect. Then a man stood, not in the main hall, but in the gallery above, where younger scientists and students had been seated. I know Miss Hartley's work, he called down. I am Thomas Fletcher, assistant professor at Imperial College. I have been using modified versions of the Thornley difference engine in my research for the past year. The design is brilliant. The electrical switching mechanism is revolutionary. And I do not care if it was invented by a man, a woman, or a trained monkey. It works. It advances the field. That is what matters. More voices joined his from the gallery. Younger men and a few women who had not yet learned to prioritize propriety over progress. They spoke of applications, improvements, innovations built on my foundational work. They spoke as scientists, evaluating evidence rather than judging character. And slowly, grudgingly, the tenor of the conversation began to shift. It was Professor Michaels who finally provided the voice of authority we needed. He rose, waited for silence, and spoke with the weight of 40 years of academic respect behind his words. I have examined Miss Hartley's work extensively. I have tested her capability personally. I have reviewed the evidence of her authorship, and I am prepared to stake my professional reputation on this conclusion. Eleanor Hartley is E. Thornley. She is a brilliant inventor, and this society will diminish itself if it refuses to acknowledge her contributions based solely on her sex. He paused. I move that we accept Miss Hartley's claim, recognize her authorship of all work published under the name E. Thornley, and extend to her the same respect and professional courtesy we would offer any inventor of comparable achievement. I further move that we reconsider our membership policies to ensure that capability, not sex, determines who may contribute to scientific progress. Who will second? The question hung in the air. This was the moment. If no one seconded the motion, if the scientific establishment united in rejection, then everything we had worked for would collapse. My reputation would be destroyed. Sebastian's standing would be damaged through association. And the message would be clear. Women could not succeed in science, no matter how brilliant their work or compelling their evidence. I second the motion, a voice said from the side of the hall. I turned to see Dr. Hammond rising, his expression serious. Miss Hartley diagnosed and repaired a pneumatic valve that had stumped my entire engineering department. That alone merits recognition. But more than that, her work deserves acknowledgement because it is excellent work. We cannot claim to value innovation while simultaneously refusing to see it when it comes from unexpected sources. Other voices rose in support. Not everyone, not even a majority, but enough. Enough scientists who valued evidence over prejudice. Enough young people who believed in meritocracy. Enough witnesses who had seen my capability firsthand and could not dismiss it. The motion moved to a vote. Hands rose, were counted, recounted. Sir Edmund looked like he might suffer an apoplexy, but he followed parliamentary procedure, perhaps because Professor Michaels was watching him with the intensity of a man prepared to make a public scandal if propriety was abandoned. The motion passed, narrowly, contentiously, with loud objections from the opposition. But it passed. I was E. Thornley, officially, formally, recognized by the Royal Scientific Society. My work was mine again. My name, my real name, was attached to innovations that would outlast me, and I had not been destroyed in the claiming of it. I found I was crying, tears streaming down my face in a thoroughly unscientific display of emotion. Sebastian pulled me close, heedless of propriety, his arms around me as the room continued its chaos around us. "We did it," he whispered against my hair. "You did it. You stood in your truth, and they could not dismiss it. I am so proud of you." The evening dissolved into smaller conversations, debates, arguments about implications and policies. The Dowager Duchess stormed out, taking several scandalized matrons with her. Lord Pemberton departed in fury, declaring the society had lost its moral compass. But others stayed. They approached with questions, with genuine curiosity, with respect that felt like cool water after years in the desert. They wanted to know about my process, my training, my plans for future work. They spoke to me as they would speak to any inventor, as an equal, as someone worth hearing. Dr. Ashworth found me near midnight as the crowd was finally thinning. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "What you did tonight, it matters, not just for you, but for all of us who have been hiding or fighting or giving up because the barriers seemed insurmountable. You made them see us, really see us. That is no small thing." "We are not done fighting," I said. "Tonight was one battle, not the war." "No," she agreed, "but it is a significant victory nonetheless. And sometimes victories, even small ones, are what give us strength to continue." She smiled. "I am organizing a group, women with scientific training, to petition for admission to universities and professional societies. If you are interested, I would welcome your participation. We could use someone with your particular combination of brilliance and stubbornness." "I would be honored," I said, and meant it. Sebastian and I left the hall near 1 in the morning, exhausted but strangely exhilarated. The carriage waited outside, the horses stamping in the cold. But before we climbed inside, I pulled him aside into the shadows of the building and kissed him properly, deeply, the way I had wanted to kiss him all evening. He responded with gratifying enthusiasm, his hands tangling in my hair, and for a long moment we simply held each other in the winter darkness, breathing hard, alive with the kind of joy that comes from surviving something terrible and discovering you are stronger than you knew. "My mother will never forgive this," he said eventually. "I may lose the family estate when she convinces my uncles to support her. I may be socially ostracized. The scandal will follow us everywhere. Then we will weather it together," I said. "We will work, we will create, we will prove our worth through what we build rather than who approves of us. And eventually, Sebastian, the world will change. Slowly, grudgingly, but it will change, because we will force it to." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Have I mentioned that I love you? That I am in absolute awe of your courage?" "Once or twice," I said, "but I will not object to hearing it again." We rode home through London's sleeping streets. Through the city we would change one invention at a time. And I thought about the long road that had brought me here, from that cramped room above a watchmaker's shop to the Duke of Ashford's carriage, from Eleanor Hartley, unknown typist, to Eleanor Hartley, acknowledged inventor, from invisibility to recognition, from fear to courage, from isolation to partnership, from hiding to truth. The work ahead would be difficult. There would be people who never accepted me, who continued to believe women had no place in science. There would be struggles and setbacks, and moments when it all seemed too hard, too much, too impossible. But I would not face them alone. I had Sebastian. I had Dr. Ashworth and Professor Michaels and the younger scientists who valued evidence over prejudice. I had my own capability, proven and acknowledged. I had my voice, finally, after so long in silence. And I had my name, my real name. Eleanor Margaret Hartley, inventor, creator, woman who refused to hide anymore. 3 months later, we published our first paper together under our own names: Sebastian Blackwood, Duke of Ashford, and Eleanor Hartley, equal authors, equal partners. The paper detailed a new type of calculating engine that merged my electrical switching mechanisms with his mechanical precision. producing a machine that could process complex mathematical operations at unprecedented speeds. It was brilliant work, genuinely innovative, the kind of breakthrough that changed fields. And it was ours, honestly and openly ours. 6 months after that, we married. Quietly, in a small ceremony attended by friends and allies, not family, as the Dowager Duchess maintained her furious disapproval. But Dr. Ashworth was there, and Professor Michaels, and the young scientists from Imperial College who had spoken in our defense. We exchanged vows in the workshop at Ashford Hall, surrounded by the machines we had created, the tools of our trade, the evidence of everything we had built together. It was not traditional, but then nothing about us had ever been traditional. I became the Duchess of Ashford, though I continued to publish under Eleanor Hartley because I had not reclaimed my name just to surrender it to a title. Sebastian understood. He had always understood. We worked side by side, collaborating on projects that pushed the boundaries of what mechanical and electrical engineering could achieve. We trained young inventors, especially women, who came to Ashford Hall seeking the kind of opportunity we had fought to create. We published, we presented, we slowly changed the conversation about who could contribute to scientific progress. It was not easy. There were always people who dismissed my work, who assumed Sebastian was the real genius and I was merely his assistant or muse. There were invitations we did not receive, societies that refused us membership, opportunities closed to women regardless of capability. But there were also victories. The Imperial College began admitting women to engineering programs. The Royal Society revised its membership policies. Dr. Ashworth's organization grew into a network of female scientists who supported each other's work and fought for institutional change. The world shifted, slowly but perceptibly, toward something more just. And in the quiet moments, late at night in our shared workshop, Sebastian and I would work on projects that existed only for us. Machines that served no practical purpose, but embodied pure creative joy. Mechanical sculptures that moved like living things. Electrical circuits that produced patterns of light and sound. Beauty for its own sake, innovation for the pleasure of creation, the kind of work that reminded us why we had fallen in love with engineering in the first place. We fell more deeply in love with each other, too. Not the desperate passion of those early months when scandal threatened and every touch was stolen, but something deeper, more solid, built on years of partnership and shared challenges and the simple daily choice to keep choosing each other. We fought sometimes, usually about technical disagreements that grew heated because we both cared so intensely about the work. But we always came back to each other, always found our way through argument to understanding, always remembered that we were stronger together than we had ever been alone. On the 5th anniversary of the revelation, Sebastian took me back to the roof of Ashford Hall where we had shared that first kiss in the snow. London spread below us, transformed by the innovations we and others had created. Electrical lights were becoming common now, turning the night into something less dark. New factories rose along the Thames, built with safety standards we had helped design. Telegraph wires crisscrossed the city, carrying information at speeds our difference engines processed. The world was changing, accelerating, becoming something we could barely imagine. And we had been part of that transformation. "Do you remember," Sebastian asked, standing beside me in the twilight, "when I told you I came up here because I could not understand people? That they were the one problem I could not solve?" I remember. He took my hand, laced his fingers through mine. "I still do not understand most people, but I understand you. I understand us. And I have learned that perhaps understanding is not required for connection. Perhaps love itself is the solution to loneliness. Not through logic or systematic analysis, but through simple willingness to be vulnerable, to be seen, to trust someone with the truth of who you are." I turned to face him, saw the softness in his eyes that he showed only to me. "You saved me," I said. "When I was lost in hiding, when I thought invisibility was safety, You forced me to step into the light. You gave me the courage to claim my work. You made it possible for me to be seen. We saved each other, he corrected gently. You showed me that isolation was not strength, but prison. You taught me that the best work, the most important creations, come not from solitary genius, but from partnership, from love. He pulled me closer. I spent my whole life building walls, Eleanor. You walked through them as if they did not exist, and you made me grateful they were breached. We stood together as night fell, and the city lit its evening lamps, and life continued below us, thousands of people living their small, ordinary lives that were actually extraordinary, because every life contained its own inventions, its own partnerships, its own private revolutions. And I thought about the girl I had been, so afraid of being seen that she erased her own name. I wished I could tell her that visibility was worth the risk, that claiming her work would not destroy her, but define her, that love was not weakness, but the greatest innovation of all, the one that made everything else possible. But perhaps she already knew. Perhaps in crossing out her name and choosing E. Thornley, she had begun the journey toward this moment, toward this man, toward this life, toward the simple truth that we become ourselves not by hiding, but by having the courage to be seen, by standing in our truth, by refusing to accept that limitations imposed by others define what we can become. I was Eleanor Hartley. I was E. Thornley. I was the Duchess of Ashford. I was an inventor, a partner, a woman who had learned that the best solutions come from facing problems honestly rather than hiding from them. I was all of these things and more, and I was finally, completely, impossibly free. And standing on the roof of Ashford Hall, with Sebastian's hand in mine and the future spreading before us, bright as electrical light, I knew that this was what courage looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to step forward anyway. Not perfection, but honest effort. Not hiding, but standing visible and vulnerable and determined in the light. The world would continue to challenge us. There would always be people who believed women had no place in science, who thought my work was Sebastian's gift rather than my achievement, who reduced our partnership to scandal rather than recognizing it as collaboration. But we had proven we could weather those storms. We had built something stronger than prejudice, more enduring than gossip, more important than society's narrow expectations. We had built a life, together, honestly, bravely. And in the end, that was the greatest invention of all.